You are listening to the Apex Hour hosted by Ryan Paul on KSUU Thunder 91.1. This show allows more personal time with our guests, allowing them to give us their stories and opinions. We will also give you new music to listen to, hoping you enjoy some new sounds and genres. Welcome to this episode of the Apex Hour.
Welcome to the Apex Radio Hour. I'm producer Kason Graff, and I'm joined with Apex Director and Professor of History Ryan Paul, and our special guest, Carrie Snow. I'm turning it over to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Kason. I appreciate it. We're glad that you're here for our last show of the semester, and we're excited that you're here. I'm excited that Carrie is here as well. So thank you for being here, Carrie Snow.
Thank you for having me, Ryan Paul.
Carrie Snow and I are old friends. Carrie Snow, for those of you who don't know, is
most everyone.
Well, she's a famous comedian. She's the manager of collections care at the Church History Museum. So essentially, she is in charge of all of the art and artifacts for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints throughout the world.
I run the daycare for art and artifacts.
You run the daycare for art and artifacts.
I don't pick what comes in there. The curators drop it off. I entertain it. I tuck it into bed every night. And
she's been there for over 20 years.
Yeah.
So we're glad that you're here. We're excited that you are our final guest for the semester.
This is a lot. I can't. I'm the closer. I don't know how I feel about this.
You're the Sinatra.
Okay.
So let me ask you this. I always want to start with a how we get to now question. So tell me, first of all, kind of where you come from and how we get to what you're doing, what you do.
Like by educational arc? Or?
Just in general, where you're from and how did all that work out?
I am born and raised in Southern California and educated at UC Santa Barbara with a degree in cultural anthropology was my major. And then I went to John F. Kennedy University in Orinda, California for museum studies, specifically focusing on collections management. In the museum world, I'm kind of a bit weird in that most people kind of fall into museum work a little bit. I knew I wanted to go into museum work from the time I was about 9. We took a field trip to, fourth grade is your state history year, so we took the field trip to the Natural History Museum of LA County, which just opened this fabulous expansion in the last week. I highly recommend this museum, and to go look at their California history exhibit, which at the time was kind of janky. So they tagged on looking at animals of the world, kind of taxidermy dioramas and dinosaurs, and there, I had a couple of experiences where it was just this magical experience looking at those animals, and the docent just kept having us you go into this big hall, and you see at the end you can clearly see an elephant there, and you see these little squares of light on the floor, and it's just very, very dramatic. And I just kept having the sense of I can't wait to get to the elephant. And so we get to the elephant in this beautiful savannah setting, and we're at this watering hole, and she's giving a lecture on elephants and how you can tell an African elephant from an Indian elephant, and I'm loving it. Incidentally, it's the ears. The African elephant, bull elephants, they're shaped like Africa. They kind of are.
I think that's great.
That's great. I remember this. So this is how you know, life-saving situation. You never know.
Or $1 million question on Jeopardy.
Yep. Mm-hmm. And so we do that, and I'm like, this is the greatest job. This woman has the greatest job ever. And then she's taking us around, and she stops, and she's got an entire grade of 9-year-old kids, and she's like, okay, guys, some animals use camouflage, so you're gonna have to look really closely at the next diorama to find the animal. And so we're like, okay, so there's 29, 30 9-year-olds just crouched down with their eyes all big, and then she shuttles us over to the next diorama, and it's this lush, verdant, jungle-like setting with this bright Bengal tiger with its teeth bared, and so 29 kids kind of all go ah! at the same time, and the docent just has this big smile on her face. I'm like, you get to learn cool stuff, hang out with cool stuff, and mess with people. This is officially the greatest job ever invented. Sign me up. And then the other thing that made me want to work in museums is, if you've ever read From the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Bowsley, Frank Weiler by Eels Königsberg. It's about two kids who run away to the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Have you read it?
Oh, yes, many times.
Many times. And they do, and they solve a mystery about Michelangelo. This book was great because it solved the mystery of if you run away from home, where you take a bath. I was going to run away to a department store that had all my needs. I just couldn't figure out how to take a bath. So they figured it out, and I was like, museums are the answer to everything. So, yeah.
So elephants and young adult fiction is what led you to do what you do.
Cannot discount young adult fiction, guys, as a genre. It's great.
No, it is. So you decide this is what you want to study, and then how does that lead to where you are now at the LDS
at the museum?
Church?
So it's a funny story. I just happened to be in graduate school. Shout out to people who are struggling and still persist in the thing. Undergraduate was fine. Graduate school was a bit of a struggle. I was trying to up my game in terms of like writing and meeting that academic standard that goes along with it, and it was a bit of a struggle. And so I met with my chair of my department, and we were talking about stuff, and I had mentioned that I was going home because I had to go to the baptism for my youngest sibling. And that led to a conversation about religion with the chair of my department, which in California is kind of odd. I don't know if it'd be odd so much in Utah, but in California it was. And she happened to know someone who worked for that church history museum. She put me in contact with them. I ended up doing an internship at the church history museum at just the right time where they were wanting trained professionals. And I got the job. I was the first trained museum professional that the Church History Museum employed. Everybody else had kind of fallen in as curators from a history degree or administrators that had kind of learned on the job, but I was trained and had a degree to do it.
And you're the reason that women can wear pants at work at the LDS
I know
Church.
you think I'm the reason women can wear pants, and I think that is a gross exaggeration of the process. It was a long time.
Well, I'd like to point out that I am a historian, and so I only speak the truth.
Yes, you are a historian, but
way.
I feel that your primary sources might be a little lacking.
How dare you? How dare you? So when we think of museums in general, right? And that's how you and I met, right?
Yes.
We were both on the board of the Utah Museum Association many years ago, and so when we think of museums, we think of a curator. Like, we have that idea, most people know and think about a curator, but registrar is not something that is a thing that people really think about or know about. Can you tell us briefly what a registrar does and what you find so fascinating about it?
Yeah, so it wasn't like everybody asked me if I'm going to be a curator or tour guide. Those are the two that they usually would ask me when I was going to school, or if thanks to Night at the Museum, if I was going to be the security guard. So we're up to 3 museum professions, everybody knows, but let's make it 4. And so what happened was curators back in the golden age of collecting, when they would just go out and try to, at the end of the 19th century and early 20th century, they're trying to find all these vanishing cultures in this way of like, hey, we're educated Western European types, we're going to go save humanity and preserve all these things. And there were some great intentions and some wonderful things that came about. But they would just go to different parts of the world, and they would bring back crates and crates of artifacts and things when they would do these digs. And there was a book that they would keep. It was called a register, and it would just be what was in the contents of each of these crates, so they could go through it. And eventually they hired someone to kind of go through those crates, and it was seen as more of a junior curator position, you know. Mm-hmm. But in time, these people stopped being like subject matter experts like Brian here, and started just specializing in managing these collections of things and these large groupings of things, and how do we organize them so you can find them for exhibits, and how do you care for them so you're not just sitting dusty on a shelf rotting away, and how do you provide just documentation about why these things are important and what you need to do. And the registrar was born, and it's it's a great profession. I love it. I've been doing it since 1999. And so these people, instead of just narrowing down on like one aspect of a collection in a museum, they will touch on many different things. And so the first museum I got the pleasure of working at was the Fowler Museum on the campus of UCLA. And I would go every morning, and there were objects on one table from the Philippines, one table was from China, and these tiny little shoes of Chinese foot binding, those little weird, wacky shoes that they would wear. And then there was another 2 tables full of African artifacts. And so I realized, I'm like, I get to see everything if I stay a registrar. Not just one thing, everything. And I get the keys to all the everything cabinets. Yeah, this is pretty cool. I think I'll stay here.
And I mean, people don't really think about this, but in the bigger museums like the Church History Museum, what percentage of collections would you say are people actually seeing versus?
Yeah, so if you go into a big museum, so you guys, you went on your senior year and you went to Washington, D.C., and you did the Smithsonian, and you're like, wow, they have the most amazing stuff I've ever seen here. Realize that that is maybe 5% of what they actually have in a museum. So most museums, 5 to 10% of what they have is on display, and it's even less if you consider, like, natural history museums, when you count like all the specimens, so all the different birds they have, all the different arrowheads, and so you see very little. So obviously those things need some care, but also the things in storage need care and organization and inventorying and constant upgrading for their housing, because this also, registration also takes this sense of, we're not only trying to preserve the intellectual legacy of these artifacts, why they're important, how they fit into human history and the history of the world, but also the physical care of these things. And so that is something that has increased over time. If you think about it, you go into a museum, you're like, why am I always so cold and why is it always so dark? It's because those are conditions that allow artifacts to live longer. And if you and that's developed dramatically. It used to be that if they wanted to keep a room humid in a house, they would just put pots of water in there to increase the humidity in there, or oil for some reason, and then as the science of registration came about, of how to track things, then there was a science of preservation that came about. And so the registrars who were kind of more closely aligned with the curatorial thing, the intellectual capacity, started being more aligned to the conservation, preservation thing. So the science gets in there. And so we have this kind of wonderful, I don't want to say we're the hub of the wheel, but I feel like we are.
Which is interesting, because if you think about collections care, if you're collecting, all you're doing is collecting wooden furniture, that's one thing, but you're responsible for a collection of a variety of things that include natural materials and fossils and art and textiles and firearms and all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah, I've got quilts, I've got dresses, I've got firearms, I've got artwork, I've got artwork from all over. Like, one of the things, we're in Utah, it's a desert. One of the things we struggle with is humidity. We can never be, the producer told me I'm never too loud on the radio, right? But in the museum, we can never get too humid in the state of Utah. We're in a desert, so everybody's like, oh, it's like, no, really, we're dry as a bone. But other places, like you go to Florida, they're trying to fight mold in their galleries. I'm just trying to fight wood from like cracking and splitting. So there's different things that we're trying to do and care for things. And
in your journey to Salt Lake, to the Church Museum, passes through another museum. Mm-hmm. Why don't you talk about that?
So I worked, prior to my job at the Church History Museum, I worked at the Richard Nixon Library and Birthplace. So at the time, it was not part of the National Archives and Records Administration. It now is. So it was an interesting thing to go from, I had been at an art museum, I had been at a cultural history museum, but this was a museum dedicated to one person and its legacy, and trying to figure that out, and then going to a museum that is dedicated to a worldwide church with a multitude of stories that I'm telling. So everything just exploded when I went to the Church History Museum.
So in the process of registration and acquiring collections, when someone doesn't come to you and say, hey, I want to donate this, does that come from a different group of people, or do they contact you, and does the leadership of the church history department or whatever say, hey, this person wants to bring this, and you say, "Oh, we got 75 million of those."
Yeah, so how we acquire things is what you're asking. Variety of ways people come to us. We go to people, so we may know through the grapevine as historians are making their rounds of looking for primary sources and interviewing people and doing oral histories. They may come across people who have access to the stuff. So they may pursue it that way. People come to us saying, we have the stuff. Would you like it? It belonged to my great-great-grandparents. We believe it came across, the plains, or we believe it was associated with this. We do some research. Sometimes we break family stories. And just FYI, your uncle is the least reliable family member on the planet. They're like, my uncle told me. I got into a thing with a lady over the phone a few months ago. Like, my uncle told me this. It must be true. And I'm like, your uncle must be just the most amazing man that you just don't automatically question him, because I question everything my uncles say. Everything. And then we will also, in some cases, commission stuff to be done. This is usually artwork. So we might find that we have a hole in our collection to depict this artistically. So we go out and try to fill the hole that way. So those come to the curatorial team. They do some research. They may contact us. Do we have a lot of these? And as we've gotten better, and we can kind of go as stuff comes in and kind of say, yes, I have said you can't get any more of these. I have 10 of these. We don't need this. This doesn't have a story. It's just the thing. That's in collecting. There's the actual object, and then there's the story. And an object becomes more valuable if you have the story attached to it. So, what's your Apollo space capsule? Mm-hmm. It's cool.
It is cool.
It is cool. Like, you sent me to a museum just to take a picture of one.
I did.
And I was happy to do it. I just want to tell all the radio listening public, I was happy to do that. I felt like I had done something great for my friend. It was very meaningful to you. But in essence, it's a thing. And unless you have that backstory of why that thing is important, it's just a big chunk of metal. But you put it in the context of the space race and everything there and exploration. And then you add in the whole thing of, I'm going to do something wonderful for my friend. It has even more meaning. So that's what we're trying to do when we collect, not just collect things, but things with meaning. I
think it's interesting that you say that. I agree with you. And there's also this, as we talk about history, we talk about historiography, right? Like the way this event has been told over time and how it has changed. And I think it's so cool to think about that in terms of material culture. So what I'm thinking of is, when you've given me a tour many times of the repository or the basement of the museum, and there's that whole section of LDS sacrament cups. Mm-hmm. that it's so interesting to me to see, while there's no story specifically behind many of those cups themselves, but the evolution of how LDS individuals participated in that ordinance through those cups is really quite interesting to me.
Yeah. So you get to understand how people are putting their place in society and in their world, and how that's changing to meet their needs. In the example you stated, it was originally, LDS sacrament was a communal cup, so you shared it with everybody else. If you were smart, it was the one time you wanted to sit in church history, you wanted to sit on the front row, because I don't know if you've seen pictures, they all had beards. And so just imagine the number of floaties that were in that communal cup by row 2. And also, some of those men, the word of wisdom was not enforced as much. So some of them were actually chewing tobacco. So just imagine sharing a cup with those people. And then we get into the understanding of epidemiology and how disease is transmitting. And during a flu epidemic, they have a general authority who's a trained physician who says, I think we should stop doing this. And then they break into the little cups, and they start off as glass. Then they become they're cleaning the glass, and if you've ever had a 12-year-old boy do dishes, it's probably a bad thing. So they're breaking it. Then they go to metal ones, and then they go to paper ones, and now we're at plastic because they're just trying to get something that they can use more readily.
And then we have the specialized ones, like for combat, like the soldier.
Oh yeah, there's
the military ones.
There's 2 sets we have, and they're kind of it's actually they're fun because we're talking about war here, but they're made by servicemen in the U.S. Navy. And if you look, they're just these wonderful little highly polished metal cups. And then you flip them over and you realize they're bullet casings for, they had to get special permission to take this because by law, those bullet casings are property of the U.S. government. And so they were supposed to be reused if they could, especially during war because of all the metal shortages. So they got permission to make those and make a 12-piece sacrament set. And so it's a interesting story, and that's right. But one time I was taking a colleague through storage, and I showed him this. This is part of my storage tour. And he started crying, and I was like, Norm, why are you crying? And he was like, Carrie, this is from my family. We thought it was gone. We thought it was lost. We don't know. Like, I haven't seen this since I was a kid. Like, I can't believe you have it. I have to tell my family now that it's safe because it was a story he had grown up with.
Yeah, just an amazing thing. So let's take our first break.
Okay.
So for those of you who've listened to our show before, know that we ask our guests to select 4 songs that resonate with them in some way, and we play them. And as the caveat that I let you know, if you're listening to this on the podcast, we can't necessarily play. Not because it's an explicit song, but due to some other licensing issues. So we'll have a playlist on Spotify for you to look at or have the song. So pause now and listen. But for those listening on the radio, the first song we're going to play that you chose and gave us is I'm On My Way by Rhiannon Giddens, who's an amazing artist. Tell us why you chose this song.
I have recently discovered her during the pandemic. When everybody was binging everything, I wasn't binging like Squid Game. I was binging Ken Burns documentaries, and I did his one on country music, and she was just so articulate about her the history of country music, and she plays the banjo, and she was just so impressive that I started looking into her, and I follow her on Instagram. She also has an amazing voice, and I just think this is such a it's just a great song to listen to, and I think kind of plaintive yet hopeful.
Okay, this is I'm On My Way by Rhiannon Giddens. Bring.
All right, that was I'm On My Way by Rhiannon Giddens. You're listening to the Apex Radio Hour here on KSUU Thunder 91.1. I'll turn it back to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Kason. So we're here with Carrie Snow, who's the manager of collections care for the Church History Museum. So essentially, she controls all the art and artifacts for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints around the world.
Once again, I think it's a slight overstatement of my duties, but okay.
Well, that's okay.
That's okay. Whatever you tell your kids I do, it's great. They love it.
Whose show?
Yours.
Whose show is this? All right.
I'm sorry.
So Carrie, you and I have been friends for a long time, and we've had these conversations before, but you left off talking about the power of an individual object and the power of an individual story and the synergistic wonder of that object and story when it's put together. So you have, in your 20-plus year career doing this, you have seen lots of things come in that tell the story of the people and the processes and the institution and the culture of the LDS Church. What are some of those objects and stories that you find compelling or that you found compelling over your time there?
So if you're asking like personal stories for me, one of my favorite paintings is one of my favorite paintings because it no longer exists. It's by the artist Minerva Teichert. It's the restoration of the Melchizedek priesthood. The museum has a sketch of hers, but we don't have the actual painting. It was destroyed in the Provo Tabernacle fire. And why it is one of my favorites is we had sent it out for conservation to be cleaned. So a background about the artist Minerva Teichert, she was in Wyoming, and she would paint her canvas. She had this wonderful thing of, she lived on this farm. She was a cattle rancher's wife, but a trained artist at the same time. And so she would paint in her very small little farmhouse, and she would get these enormous canvases, fold them in half, paint half the canvas, let that dry, flip it over, paint the other half of the canvas. This is a huge canvas. And then tack it to the back of her house and see if it worked, and then futz with it to make it work at the last minute. But she didn't varnish her paintings. She believed that it just got dirty over time and discolored, and so she didn't do it. I also think she didn't have time to do it the way she worked. But so as a result, the actual surface of the painting gets really dirty. So if you've gone into art museums, especially you're looking at Renaissance paintings, you're like, why are these so dark? Chances are it's not the painting that's dark, it's the varnish that has yellowed over time. Hers just get actual grime on the surface. And so we sent it off to be cleaned. It came back, and it was not on the stretcher bar. So the stretcher is the part of the canvas that gives it structure. It's the wooden part on the back. For you non-artistic folks, I'm just giving you your quick art lesson today. And so it was just a flat canvas, so we had to stretch it. And so you put it down, and then you tack it in place, and you kind of wet the canvas down, and you stretch it. So when the canvas dries, it gets really tight, and so it just has that nice tightness. They could like bounce a quarter off. Don't bounce quarters off paintings. That's my other lesson for today. And so we were doing that, and I had never done that before. So I was working with this conservator and a team of people, and this conservator was this Romanian woman. And so even though she didn't try, she was very like forceful. She was like this little Romanian woman, but just imagine, her name was Mia, and she's telling us how to do it. And she's like, you gotta yank these things. And I was like, this is a really expensive painting, and we're yanking it. And I'm like stressing out about this. And what's cool on the back of it, it's stamped, and it's stamped U.S. Army. And we realized, during this, that she didn't have access. There was no art supply store. There was no Michael's. There was no Hobby Lobby. She used what she had. And the canvas that she had access to was surplus Army 10 canvas. And so that's what she painted her paintings that are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars that people want to collect are printed sometimes on U.S. Army 10 canvas. So we're having this thing, and I'm just having this meeting, and it turns out beautifully. And incidentally, when you clean one of her paintings, the colors just pop. They're so bright and vibrant. And I love her because she has this ability to convey movement in a still image, which not all artists can do, but it's just great. And then years later, I'm heading down to Christmas with my brother. We're driving down to California, and we're hearing on the radio, and I think we're somewhere near Cedar City when this happens, and we hear about the Provo Tabernacle fire. And I'm trying to get a hold of it because I know that painting is there. And then finding out, by the time we get to California, that painting is gone. It no longer exists. So I have a wonderful attachment to a thing that no longer exists. There is a hole in my collective art history memory now.
And the museum just recently did, maybe not recently, but a Minerva Teichert exhibit. Mm-hmm. It's not still up. Right?
No, we closed it this summer.
So, and if I remember, I had a chance to see it in the spring, but there was a remnant of that painting that was saved, right?
Yeah, so this is the other part of the story. So we do have like this section that's wrapped around that stretcher. So it might have actually been something I actually physically touched, right? That is saved. That's the only little bit. But what was making it in the news wasn't this painting that was destroyed, was a print of the painting of Jesus Christ. And I'm not saying don't have pictures of Jesus Christ or pictures of Jesus Christ are bad. I'm a big fan. I just want to get that out. I'm a big fan. He is an instrumental figure in my life. And it's a print. It's a mass-produced thing, but it had burned, and it burned from the outside in, and the only thing that was visible was kind of like his torso. And so everybody was saying it was a miracle that this like thing had been preserved. And we were kind of like, yeah, but you lost this other thing. This was like their only really good picture of this one event in church history. And you're talking about the mass-produced print that you can still get today.
So the other thing that, and I just had heard this story earlier today, you had come to speak to one of my classes, is the story of the angel statue. Mm-hmm. So can you talk about, first of all, how LDS art in the past had portrayed angels versus other Christian religions, and how this statue kind of plays into that?
Yeah, this is something I didn't know because I don't have an art history background. Like I said, I have an anthropology background. And so when I got to the museum, this is very timely, so you guys can think about this. I told Ryan's class, think about this for the next month as you pass all these creche sets. Creche set is a fancy word for nativity set. There you go. There's your second lesson for today. We're up to 3, I think. Anyway, so we're doing this display of creche sets at the museum, and we're putting this set up. It comes from Italy, and it has a beautiful angel, and she's holding a banner that says like "Glory to God" or something in, I think, Latin or whatever. And we're putting it up on the wall, and a very earnest young woman who works for the floral services department says, sisters, I don't know, but in the Mormon church we don't believe the angels have wings. And I was like, I kind of heard this incidentally, and I never put it together that in LDS art our angels do not have wings, because we have been a people of the book, meaning we had scripture from when we were founded in 1830 on. We didn't have to create a nonverbal language like other churches had to. So if you were trying to communicate things to a mass of people that largely were illiterate, you had to do so with pictures. And so if you were trying to convey that there is an otherworldly creature like an angel, and you had to distinguish them from other people, you needed some features to do that, and one of them was a pair of wings. And there are seraphim in the Bible and everything. So angels tend to have wings. We didn't believe that, and so and I asked our art curator the other day, and I was like, so give me the lowdown on that one. I've never heard that written. I've never seen that. It was never in my Sunday school lesson manual. And she said, it dates to a time where we got this wonderful piece of art called the Angel of Peace, and the angel was purchased by Don Carlos Young, son of Brigham. He has, the angel has wings, but somehow he had heard something, and he was just struck with the feeling that that angel needed not to have wings. It just needed to be a personage, and that would be sufficient enough. So he took the wings off. So now with
a hammer.
Well, with a hammer, like a hammer
chisel.
I'm
chiseled them off.
I'm not saying it's not like he went a full Gallagher on this angel and just
What a reference that our young people may not really know, but that's great. So
I just feel like there's my goal here is to have a whole bunch of Google searches that your people do to go down the rabbit hole.
So what year?
Kason's already doing it.
He is. It's par for the course. What year? And I got him in trouble last time too. What year would be talking here? Is this the 1890s?
I honestly don't know. I'd have to go. This is the other thing.
So he's a grandson or a son of Brigham Young. Okay. So he chisels the wings off the angel.
Takes the wings off, and so it goes up in its display for many years, comes back down, and so now I have the statue, but in a box. Now they're in the same box, but for a while I had the statue, and then the wings came, and so now I have the statue, and the wings and the angel are at least in the same box now, crate, just not in the same thing.
They've been reunited.
Sort of, yeah.
Speaking of boxes, let's take our second break, and I am so glad you chose this song. I haven't heard this version, but I've heard this song many times in my own graduate work, mostly by her father. But this is, you chose Tennessee Flat Top Box by Roseanne Cash. Can you tell us why you chose this song?
So I like this song. This is from when I was a kid, and I always thought it was just a really lovely song. And then I heard she was doing it. She did it because she recorded it because her dad recorded it, and I think he would sing it to her. So I just thought, it's this wonderful singer, generational kind of song shared. and I knew you'd get a kick out of it. Also, it is one of the few songs that is like in the register of things I can sing. So this is one of the few songs I can sing in the car that sounds somewhat passable and good.
Her dad being Johnny Cash.
Her
just
dad
to be
being
very clear.
Johnny Cash,
All
not
right.
Ryan, Johnny Cash.
Yeah. So this is Tennessee Flat Top Box by Roseanne Cash. Bring.
All right, that was Tennessee Flat Top Box, sung by Roseanne Cash. You're listening to the Apex Radio Hour here on KSUU Thunder 91.1. I'll turn it back to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Case, and I appreciate it. So we left off talking about artifacts and stories, and you mentioned... Is that me?
No, that's
Okay.
me. My nose
So
itched.
sorry, I was artifacts and stories. One more I want to talk about before I shift to the next thing I want to chat with you about is one of my favorite pieces that I've seen that isn't on display pretty much ever is a gigantic penguin.
He's been on display.
Well, I haven't
Not
seen
not in my okay.
not in your lifetime.
Well,
yeah,
no,
like in
no.
1860. But I mean,
Not in my tenure at the museum is what I meant to say.
so let's talk about the penguin.
Okay, let's
it's
talk
a
about
big
the-
one.
It's a big one. It's from so we had a missionary brought it back with them. They went to South America. So geographically, I don't know if you know, the tip of South America gets actually really cold, and so penguins can live there. I know you don't automatically think South America penguins, but here we go. And it's not clear that if it was alive or dead.
Time frame.
Time frame. So we're talking late 19th, early 20th century. So what makes this interesting and why we still have it is that on the front of the little stand that the pediment that the Pengy, that's his name, sits on, there's a little label that is like thumbtacked into place that says Deseret Museum. And the Deseret Museum and Menagerie was the first museum in the state of Utah. So a menagerie is a fancy word for zoo. So there was actually a zoo attached to it. And it collected everything. So it's in that wonderful, crazy period of conspicuous consumption and mass collecting of just society in general. And so people had collections of weird and crazy things from all over the world. And so the Deseret Museum was like this. So it would be natural history specimens, that things that people had found on their farms as they're building up their farms. They had things that were considered relics that belonged to early church leaders. They had things that they had obtained through like crazy travels. My uncle was in the Navy and went here, or I traded for this somewhere along my travels. Like we just had some crazy. There's like a garrote from France that's like a seated thing that you would take, and there's a big screw, and you would slowly like choke someone to death. They were just weird things. And so we got them, and they went on display, and they were kind of organized, like here are the things about church history, here are things about North America, here are the Indians. We wouldn't use that phrase, we'd say Native American, and more appropriately use the tribe that they actually came from, including mummies, which we don't have those anymore, thank goodness. It's wildly inappropriate to have those things. And they would kind of organize it that way in these glass cases, and Pengy was part of a display from animals in South Africa. And then the Deseret Museum keeps losing its building, and it moves from place to place in downtown Salt Lake. And eventually, it's run by, it gets to a point where they have to split up the collection. And so the collection kind of gets cleaved off, and the natural history specimens, like about the minerals and all the plants and stuff, get sent up to the becomes the Natural History Museum of Utah up at the University of Utah. Then some parts go to the Daughters of the Utah Pioneers and other museums, but a lot of it stays here and eventually becomes the Bureau of Information, then the Museum on Temple Square, then in 1984 the Museum of Church History and Art, and then later in the early aughts becomes the Church History Museum.
And that's how Pengy stays.
That's how Pengy stays, because
there.
everybody likes him. He was on display when we were doing, in the, I think, late 80s, we did a retrospective of how the museum came to be after we opened. And he went on display he comes out on display for different things. He's part of my standard storage tour because I like to talk about even museums have history of how they came to be.
But we don't know if I would hope that he came back alive.
Like it's like a Mr. Popper's penguins?
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Brother Popper's
like,
penguins?
Didn't you say it was like a gift for somebody's mom or something like that?
Yeah, I think he brought it back for, like, mom. And you have to have a special relationship with your mom to either, A, send her a live penguin, and you have to have a really special relationship if you send her a dead penguin.
I guess to Utah especially, too. So one of the things I want to talk about is another one of your loves, is probably fair to say, and many of you.
Okay, I just want to say that Ryan has like a set of notes that his students have made for him. There are multiple pages, and in my entire life, I never thought I was worth multiple pages of notes. I do not know what these notes say, so I'm a little concerned.
No, and I didn't need notes for this. This is something that I knew about you specifically, is you were a big supporter, and still are, of roller derby.
Yes.
In Utah. In fact, you helped maintain and save the roller derby.
One of our leagues, yeah.
One of your leagues there. So, first of all, please tell us more about how that happened in roller derby, and even more importantly, share with us your roller derby name, because you get to choose a name, right? Like Crusher or something like that.
Yeah.
But this is good.
This is good. So the way, and this will come about, roller derby, everybody kind of had a very negative connotation. It was something that originally came about during the Depression. There was this weird phase in American history where you would it's like ultra marathon running. So they would do those, but they would do like dance marathons, which see how long you could stand up and dance. And then they did skate marathons, and it's just how long you could skate. And this man named Leo Seltzer was sponsoring these things, and there was this mother-son pair of Josephine Bogash and her son. She was known as Ma Bogash. They would do these like skate things. They would just skate around the track together, kind of thing. The mom was a bit ruthless, and she carried a hat pin, and she poked people with the hat pin to get them to fall down. So she was kind of fighting dirty. And then Leo kind of realized, I could take this and make this like a thing where, you could like body check people and add a little hockey element. And so this is how it got started. And then it was going through the Depression when it was a quick thing. And then it became something when TV started getting broadcast, and it was something that could be used as filler, because unlike any other professional sport that has a season, so you need to know how the Dallas Cowboys did last week and how who's up in the standings in the American League West for baseball. You didn't need to know to do that for roller derby. You could just record the games, stick them on at like 10 in the afternoon, 10 in the morning, 4 in the afternoon, 10:30 at night, in between Doctor Who reruns. And so, but then as all the sports like baseball, football, basketball started signing contracts with national television organizations to have their games televised across the nation, the need for roller derby and the popularity fell. So it was kind of relegated to like county fairs, and by then, and then by then had become, because it'd been trying to the whole notion of the violence of roller derby came into play just to keep it alive, and then it totally completely crashed. And in the early aughts, some women are like, this is kind of interesting. They found like an old ESPN tape, like the equivalent of ESPN, the Ocho, and they're like, oh, this is great, we should do this. So they kind of came up with a way to start doing roller derby by themselves, and it's a whole saga. But eventually they didn't know the rules, but then they ran into someone's grandma who knew the rules, so she explained how roller derby worked to them. And it started in Texas, and none of these women were, because of the bad connotations with roller derby, they didn't want to play under their real name, so they coined what they call derby names, and it's your name that you pick that you are known by. There are people on this planet who don't know me as Carrie Snow. They know me by my roller derby name, which is Jane Acostin, which is like Jane Austen except a little tougher. That's why I picked it. And so there are people that will call me Jane, and I've been with like regular friends, and then someone calls me Jane, and they just look at me like this idea, like, are you suddenly a secret agent that I didn't know about? And I'm like, maybe. So because they were largely grassroots run organizations by women for women, they tend to have a tenuous financial structure sometimes. And sometimes if the founder moves on, then a league can fold. They can just say, I'm done. We were given an opportunity to buy a league out from the people that founded it so we could keep all the equipment and everything that they had purchased and the name and all our logos and everything. So in over I think 2-month period, we had to raise $10,000 to buy the old owners out. And so I had headed that and became, for a brief time, as what my late brother would call the Vince McMahon of roller derby in Salt Lake.
So how many?
So I'm going to be called as a cabinet secretary, I'm pretty sure.
I'm sure. Yeah. So how many teams were there?
At the time, there were 2 women's teams, sometimes 3, 2 home teams, 2 travel teams, a youth team, and a men's team.
And what was your team called?
I changed teams a lot. So I played for the Hot Wheelers. I also played for Black Diamond Divas. I also played for the Bonneville Bone Crushers for 1 game. So, yeah.
That was actually my nickname in high school, the Bonneville Bone Crusher.
Really?
I went to Bonneville High for a year.
Really?
I just was a sophomore. So
the depths of Ryan
you've
Paul,
actually
ladies.
done some, and I've seen this, connecting roller derby with your work. So very briefly, can you give us one of the greatest lessons that roller derby has taught you about your work product?
Okay. I feel like all these questions I have to give like a background and then I actually give the answer. So if you guys go to the park and you see people on roller skates, they're always they're standing up tall and they've got their cute little roller skates on and maybe they're wearing some like retro 70s gear, like cute shorts and knee socks, and they've got like headphones on and they're doing whatever and they're just like la 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 la. When you play for roller derby, what you do is you kind of like have this stance that's like you've kind of tried to like shorten you're trying to get shorter and more compact, and that what keeps you solid and gives you balance is you're engaging all your core muscles. And so like your stomach is just like rock hard and you're just trying to support yourself through the core muscles. And you want to get low, so you're using those muscles, but you're also limiting how much space you are as a target to hit. And you're trying to say how much flexible, like you can store up your energy to make a big push to go do something, to go hip check someone out, to make an explosive turn, sprint out of the pack, that type of thing. And for me, that meant in a museum setting or any other setting work-wise, you have to stick to not just your core muscles, but your core functions. And so determining what you and your organization do, and you kind of preserve those things and be very clear about what your core functions are, and not waste space or energy trying to do something you are not. I even think this is true in life. We go through, and you kids out there in Radio Land are trying to figure out who you are in life, and maybe you're trying to meet some expectations for what other people say is what an adult is like or what a person your age should be doing. And it may not fit with you, and you're trying to expend so much energy and effort trying to do what you're not. Really, what you should try to do is find out what you really are and focus on that. And then when you need to push harder to move forward in those things that mean the most to you, you have the energy and the strength to do so.
Wow, well done. Well done. All right, let's go to our third song as we move into the last segment of our show. This is a song you chose called Super Graphic Ultra Modern Girl by Chapel Roan. Why did you choose this song?
So, okay, other than the blatant pandering to your audience, by picking Chapel Roan, she's just really awesome. But I am a public radio junkie, and I give a lot of credit to people who appear on public radio that do not need to appear on public radio. Like, that is not their core audience. And so she was on this about a month ago. She was on Wait, Wait, Don't Tell Me, which is an NPR news quiz thing. It's hilarious. But she was on it, and I was like, "You don't have to be on here. You are nominated for Grammys. Like, you just sailed off the charts. Like, you don't need to be here. Yet you're here with like the biggest group of radio nerds, and I respect you for being here. So I just love her for that. Plus, it's a fun song.
This is Super Graphic Ultra Modern Girl by Chapel Roan. Bring.
All right, that was Super Graphic Ultra Modern Girl by Chapel Roan. You're listening to the Apex Radio Hour here on KSU Thunder 91.1. I'll turn it back to you, Ryan.
Thank you, Kason. So we are in our last segment of the show.
I know, I'm a little sad.
What's bringing us joy. And first of all, thank you, Carrie, for being here. And let's go here. So, Carrie Snow, what are you currently watching, reading, listening to, or playing that is bringing you joy?
Once again, out there in Radioland, Ryan and I have known each other for a long time. Ryan doesn't know this, but he has filled a hole in my life, inadvertently left by my late father. So I don't want to cry. Okay. So my dad and I we had a lending library, and then as I got older, I'm the only girl in a family of boys, and I was the first girl born in my dad's family in 50 years. So I was a bit of an oddball to him, so I don't really always have an automatic, easy connection with my dad. But as I got older, I realized what we had a connection were books. And so I would borrow books from him, and he would keep his books immaculate, and I would keep my books like, I don't know, I throw them in a tote bag, and then I give them to him. And there's like a particularly trash version of a biography of Benjamin Franklin that I like cringe at every time I see it on my mom's shelf. But it's like this lend-lease program. We have that now.
We do.
So Ryan lets me borrow a book. He borrows a book from me. We share audiobooks. And then eventually, after about a year, I give him back the book that I borrowed. And so last year when I was here, I borrowed The Wilderness Warrior about Teddy Roosevelt and his conservation efforts. But in that book, they referenced a novel by Owen Wister called The Virginian. And so I was going through my Audible book thing, and I came across that. And I was like, I'm going to read this because Teddy Roosevelt read this. And yes, and it is a period novel about a cowboy.
Yes, it is.
You've read it.
I have read The Virginian.
Yeah, it's a great book. I mean, it is a product of its time, so it is kind of a little formulaic, but it's fun. And I'm just like, oh, I can see why Teddy Roosevelt was so enchanted with this. And then it made me appreciate my buddy all over again, which always brings me joy.
Thank you. The Virginian by Owen Wister. Kate Scher, what are you currently watching, reading, listening to, or playing that is bringing you joy?
I am going to see Wicked tomorrow, the Wicked movie. I'm very, very excited. So for the last week and a half, I've just been religiously listening to the Wicked soundtrack to get ready for
Congratulations.
it.
I saw it on Broadway.
So excited.
I get to be one of those people. Well, I saw it on Broadway.
That's way cooler than the movie theater.
No, my coworker. I have a coworker. He's our crating and rigging guy, so he's down in the wood shop all the time, and he comes to me yesterday before I left, and I said, well, how was your night? And he goes, oh, I went and saw Wicked. And I was just like, Aaron, you've got to be the most manly man into musical theater
not
ever.
Wicked's target audience.
Yeah, you're not. No, he's sitting there with a belt sander, and he gets really excited about the new saw that we bought, the power saw, and but he loves Wicked. So you'll like it.
Don't sing in the theater. Sing to yourself.
Yep.
And the book is very, very different than the musical.
Yeah.
Just so you're aware. It's got a little more woohoo.
Good to
All
know.
right.
Good to know.
Lauren Bird, what are you currently watching, reading, listening to, or playing that is bringing you joy?
I've been watching the new season of Arcane, and it's been great because the characters are super compelling and the animation is gorgeous. So that's been bringing me a lot of joy.
Okay. Thank you. Kason Graff, what are you currently watching, reading, listening to, or playing that is bringing you joy?
So as soon as we wrap this up, I am running out of the radio booth to the parking lot where my grandma's parked.
That's so
and
adorable.
we're
Grammy's
driving
picking
to
you up.
Vegas so that we can watch my sister in her school play tonight in about 3 hours. It's a 2.5-hour drive, which is why we're leaving immediately. And so we can see her in Puffs, a knockoff Harry Potter play. and I told her to tune in right now. Nobody replied to my text, so I don't know if she's listening. But Cassie, if you are listening, I'm very excited to see you in your play, and we'll be there in a couple hours. All right, Ryan, what are you reading, watching, listening to, or playing that is bringing you joy?
I am watching a show with my wife that she's watched many seasons of, and I just picked up because I was looking for something that was a little more, to watch at the end of the night that doesn't, not like the
Brain
Diplomat
Candy?
or something that isn't, not even brain candy, but it's a very, very touching. It's a show called Call the Midwife.
Oh,
I started with season 10, and I got to tell you, I look forward to that moment in the evening when the kids are in bed and we can just sit and I can watch Call the Midwife, which is one of the only shows that Cammie actually watches. Like normally she's got her iPad or her phone or whatever, but it is a beautifully comforting show, and it brings me joy.
Did she do what I do? Like, I like that show, but I can't watch that show because invariably I watch it and I'm having like a moment, and then I start crying, and I'm like, I'm crying watching PBS, and
I have the moments. Last night something touching happened, and I went ooh, and went like that, and she looked at me like I was just the weirdest dude ever.
I'm just
I was
crying,
like, so Call the Midwife. So this is our last live show for the fall semester. So we, the radio, please listen to we'll air some repeats. These will all come in on our podcast. So please download our podcast, the Apex Radio Hour, on Spotify or iTunes or anything you listen to, and listen to our whole seasons past. Rest assured, I know you're worried, but Kaysen and Lauren and Kate and I will be back in the spring after this year. So for all those listening, have an amazing Thanksgiving, an amazing holiday. Carrie Snow, thank you for closing us out.
Thank you for having me.
Kaysen, Lauren, and Kate, you're the best ever. And
You really are.
Let's end with the last song. It's very appropriate. Edge of 17 by Stevie Nicks. Why did you choose this?
Because this is one of my. I'm a big baseball fan, and the concept of a walk up song for a pitcher coming in from the bullpen at the end, mid game, or someone coming up to the plate to bat that's supposed to like pump you up and strike fear in the hearts of your enemies. This is one of mine. And I think it's a great one. The other one is Beyonce, Crazy in Love from Coachella, but I thought that was like blatant pandering if I paired it with the Chapel Roan. So we just went with classic Stevie Nicks.
All right. This is Edge of 17 by Stevie Nicks. Thanks for listening to the Apex Radio Hour. Bring.